Welcome everyone to this new great talk on integrity of elections, human rights, and international cooperation. At GREYTALK, we are particularly delighted to have this great talk for at least 3 reasons. The first one, because it is very timely. Just a few days ago, we were relieved and admirative of the youth and the strength that Amanda Gorman, who said, "But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can be never permanently defeated." Her words did not only impact the USA, but the whole world. Nevertheless, today, there are still members of the opposition in many countries that are persecuted, and many electoral processes that are not really as transparent as they should be. Electoral integrity is inherent in human rights and in the principles of democracy and the representative system of government. The second reason is that in GREYTALK, in this great talk, we have the participation of the Kofi Annan Foundation, so dear to our honorary president, Michael Muller, and whose executive director, Mrs. Momal Banyan, participated at our first intergenerational dialogue in 2018. We are very happy to have with us Declan O'Brien, who is the coordinator of the program of elections and democracy at the Kofi Annan Foundation, and that launched the Electoral Integrity Initiative that combines some of the world's most respected elder statesmen and women, as well as the world's foremost experts on electoral integrity. With the help of its unique network, the Kofi Annan Foundation works with countries on how to strengthen the integrity and legitimacy of their electoral processes and avoid election-related violence so that elected officials can govern peacefully in a climate of trust. Of course, the third reason is that we are also having with us from Mexico, Dr. Don Nguyen Huu, who is a former UN senior political officer and former member of the UN observation missions. And he has been internationally recognized as an expert on electoral issues and was the recipient in 2018 of the Joe C. Baxter Award by the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. So in the invitation to this great talk, there are at least 3 questions that GREYTALK we felt that would be of interest to start having an answer, which are: what is electoral integrity and how to achieve it? What is the role of the UN observation missions and the Kofi Annan Foundation? And what is the link between electoral integrity and human rights? So Dong and Declan will help us to answer to these questions. And I will leave the floor to Manuela, who will give us some indications on how the session will develop. Please, Manuela, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Alejandro. For those that are not familiar with our great talks, it's a very easy technology. We have a chat column at the right side of your screen where you can write your question or your comments anytime. And then I will try to manage to regroup, if necessary, the questions so that there is some coherence in it. But anyway, feel absolutely free to intervene anytime with anything that you would like to add to what our speakers will tell us. And also our speakers, both Dong and Declan, please feel absolutely free also to come back, to add, to elaborate on whatever you will explain as a form of introduction in your first interventions right now. I would like to start with Dr. Dong, calculate more or less between 10 to maximum 15 minutes each. And I would like to start with Dr. Dong. In addition to the questions that Alejandro just flagged, which are really, I think, the starting point, I think it would be good for us, which are non-experts, to understand that electoral integrity is a little bit more than just counting votes, right? Dong, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks. I just put my minutes on for not going too far. But may I ask you a favor? In the UN system, we use not to talk about the title. So for you, it should be just Dong, not Doctor, because Doctor is kind of things you put in your visit card here in Mexico, but not in the UN family. So just Dong. And hi, thanks for everybody to allow me to talk about this election. And I would say it should be Declan who have to start on integrity, because in my time and until I retired, officially in 2004, but really in 2011, we were talking about free and fair elections. We didn't talk until 2006, something like that, about integrity of election. So these changes is a change probably we will have also to analyze later. But now, not going to that kind of expert discussion or historical discussion, let me say 3 points. Very a little bit didactic one, but I think it's important it's at least for us to judge different kind of election, especially the election has just had finished a few days ago. The 3 points are the following. One is that how do the normal citizen look at the one elections? And what does it mean, the normal election we have? Second is what is the electoral administration? Because when you talk about elections, you have to talk about organization. And that's part of the things I say when IFES gave me this award on electoral administration. And the third one is my conclusion is that elections are important, are well organized, or whatever you want. But if they are not credible, they're worth nothing. And the credibility is not a matter of figures. It doesn't mean that you have an election with 99% of participation, 99% of voting, and then you are more credible than the one who have only 30% or 40%. So that, when we say that, now I would try to make it a little bit more systematic. First, the citizen point of view of election. It's very simple. The day you go to vote, you will in many countries, in poor countries, people who are dressed, they are putting their best dress to go to vote, because it's kind of the Mexican call it's a fiesta civil, no? So a celebration, and then they go to vote. You go to vote, and you go back home, or after the church sometime, you go back home, you have a nice lunch, you discuss with friends, and you sit down in front of the television to watch what is the situation. And in the evening, normally you have results. And who are the victims of such a process? I say that's just one victim. The bottle of wine you are sipping because you celebrate or you console yourself. And I find my job as observers extremely rewarding, because I would go to celebrate with those who win, and I go to consolate with those who lose. So that's the normal situation. But we forgot that it's a very small act of depositing your bulletin in the ballot box have many meanings. I will try to lay down, because then we know why the elections are sometimes, and most of the time, linked to the idea of democracy and linked to the idea of human rights. The first characteristic of such a very simple act is that the vote is a political, individual, and secret act. Normally, a political act is an open one, but this one is the only one you have it secretly. So that's the first characteristic. We tend to forget too much. Second is that the the day you vote is the only day in the week, in the year, where all of the citizens of the country encounter what they call the state. The state, we find it, in the public services, the policeman, the mail service, but we never find in one day from the frontier north to the south to the east to west of one country, all the population will accomplish the same act. It means that they identify themselves as members of a political community. That's something we tend also to forget, because the vote is so routine, such a routine that we tend to forget that. But in the new country, to say that there is the state, then you have to vote. So that's why it's important to define the citizenship. I am citizen, a member of the political community, national community, because I vote the same day. The third aspect, and it's also important, is that you vote in a very easy way, because you don't go to much complicated. Why? Because an electoral system is worth because of its durability, because it's you know that for years. So that's why you don't have that much electoral reform. And each time you discuss about electoral reform, it's really complicated, because you change the tradition of the country and the solidity of an institution like elections. The solidity is time. So you don't have to change it every time you think that it's appropriate. I work with an organization called the British Reform Society for Proportional System. They worked for 30 years. They didn't change anything. So they closed down because there's no money. So that's to say that you have to think that you are familiar with the system, because the system is strong, and the system is strong because it takes time to build it. Yeah. So third and fourth element is that the vote is a decisive break with the traditional way of transmitting power. The monarchy has an heir. The authoritarian regime has appointment. You appoint somebody, and by your vote, you decide that this change of transmission of power has been broken forever. Now, those who govern me have to be elected by us, even if it's not our candidate, but at least it's our vote. And if he win, he win. If he lose, he lose. But there is no more designation as in the monarchy system, for example. So that was one of the main discussion with the French Revolution in 1789. So the fifth characteristic is that what I summarized like this. In a democratic system, in the democratic countries, the discussion about who will be candidate is an open discussion. It's a transparent discussion, and the vote is secret. In an authoritarian system, it's completely the reverse. They discuss secretly in a room, filled of smoke in those days, and then they discuss that, and we don't know how they manipulate that. And then they go out, and the vote is secret. Now you have half of the population in the world, almost, who are still doing that, discreetly discussing who is going to take power and voting openly. When in our country, one of the principles is that a free vote is an unpredictable vote. So that's we tend also to forget, but we have to compare our situation with the situation in other countries. And why elections? Six characteristics. Why elections is important for human rights? For one very simple reason. Have those of you who have been in Colombia will notice one thing. In front of the Supreme Court of Justice in Colombia, is equivalent of Supreme Court in everywhere. In the front of the building, you have a very interesting sentences from a general Santander. That's a general. Say, arms gave us independence. The law will give us liberty, freedom. Why the law give us freedom? Because the law is binding. The law is, kind of authorization, but binding each other. But why it gives us freedom? Because the things interesting with the law is that we citizens build the law. We create the law. We create the law by voting for those who elaborate the law. That's why Montesquieu, one of the fathers of the democratic system, would say, we citizens are the father and the children of the law. We are father because we vote for those who elaborate the law, and because we vote for them, we are obliged to obey them. That's basically what we call now the rule of law. But if you think about that, the rule of law came from the elections. And the rule of law mean what? Mean to protect our basic, really basic human right is freedom. So that's why, we tend to forget that, but we have to understand that the simple vote, simple act of voting, it means a lot in terms of our citizen life. And the last aspect we also tend to forget is that when you go to vote, your vote means your vote is equal to the vote for all of the citizens. It means by the acting of vote, you affirm one thing. We are equal. We are citizens. We are equal. It doesn't mean that we are women or men. We are rich or poor. We are sick. When we are sick, you cannot vote anyway. But anyway, that's a different thing. But we poor or rich, men or women, educated or not educated, we are equal. And this equality means one thing. In the world of law, all citizens are equal. And the fight for the last 200 years, until today, is still that same. Who can vote? And those who were educated can vote. Those who have money can vote. So we fight for that until today. Until today, you have a lot of countries where women cannot vote, for example. Oh, it means that equality has not been respected. It means also why elections are important for human rights, because elections provide a mechanism of defense of two of the really basic value of basic right. It's equality and liberty. And through the discussion, we also have to protect the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, the freedom of expression. That's why the whole idea of elections are there. My time is going short. Have two more things to go. One is the administration. And the third is credibility. Administration is simple. It means that you have something like 400 to 500 acts to complete before you can organize the elections. So those are the list of electors, how you vote, how you count the vote. And those acts are always, registered by law. It means the electoral process is a legal process. You never forget that. It's not an administrative, it has to be a legal process. So if you the legal process, and my just apprentices here, I would say my job, I'm not talking about me as the international expert, I work mainly on the administration aspect. I never work on the lowest, on the principle or otherwise. It has come to that because most of the countries now master the way how to do an administration, to plan logistic plan, to have a financial plan, and to have the operational plan. Those are the things they know. But then it's legal, it's efficient, but is it credible? So that's one of the last point I have to mention. In my days, I have the feeling that administration is well mastered by the countries. But what is important, and what my role was important, was the role that to build some trust. It's not just to mention the importance of trust, but to build trust. And I give you an example to end this speech. And sorry for taking the 3 minutes more. In the case, my last time working in Zimbabwe before it's come to to crisis, is that the opposition refused to go to elections because they say, wow, you have many dead people in the registration list. Fine. Why that? Because in the case of Zimbabwe at that time, AIDS was making a massacre. Thousands of people died during the AIDS. And between the time they closed the list of electors and the day of vote, you have 10,000, 20,000 of people who are dead. And the neighbors will say, this person is dead. Why do we have them in our voters? And we have to explain that, and they accept that. That's why we do not try to hand them, but we try to build with them, the trust in the system. So that goes to that. I know that you are much more interested by the discussion on the last elections of our one of the main contributor for the UN, but let that to have our discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dong. Yes, of course, we will come back on that country that you don't like to mention, apparently. I would like to give the floor now to Declan also for his own introductory remarks and comments and definitions, or even examples, whatever you think is relevant to complement and to go ahead with the discussion. Declan, please.
Thank you, Manuela, and thank you, Alejandro, as well for your introduction. I agree, obviously, entirely with the timeliness of this discussion, not just in terms of some very high-profile recent elections, which apparently we're not naming, but also in terms of sort of the global pushback against democratic ideals and values that frankly has been going on for years now. If I may, what I think I'll probably do is just briefly outline the sort of the role and approach of the KA Foundation in the elections and democracy space, because it might not be something that everyone's familiar with. Complement some of Dong's points, because frankly, I agree with nearly every single one of them, which is helpful. But then I think what I'll do with maybe the second half is look at the question of social media and the internet and the impact on democracy, because that's an area I think both, again, that is incredibly timely at the moment, but also a thematic area where the foundation has been doing a lot of work recently. So I'll take that approach, if I may. But I think what I'll do first of all is answer that third question that you put to both of us in terms of the link between human rights and electoral integrity. And for us, it's quite simple in terms of, you know, democracy as a political system is not perfect, and certainly democracies in the world are far from perfect, some of them. But our opinion and our findings throughout all of the work that we've been doing is that democracy still undoubtedly is the political system that is most conducive to delivering development, improving service delivery, holding elected officials to account, basically the whole gamut of tools and mechanisms that you need to deliver and protect human rights depend on a functioning democratic system. And in our opinion, elections are the heart of that democratic process. Sometimes I think people lose track of all of the other elements of democracy, and perhaps voters are guilty in many places of, you know, turning up every 4 years and just casting a ballot. There's actually a lot more to the sort of engagement and ongoing discussion that is democracy. But nevertheless, I think if you don't get the elections right, then there are sort of any number of consequences for the health and robustness of your democratic system. The Kofi Annan Foundation is not a typical electoral assistance outfit. We do not do the sort of administrative assistance that Dong was talking to. We do not observe electoral processes. We do not provide technical assistance. And in fact, when Mr. Annan set up the foundation just over a decade ago now at this point, I don't even think it was sort of a main area of work that he was envisaging. But what happened, which many of you might remember, in fact, maybe were involved in some way, shape or form, is that at the end of 2007, Kenya held a presidential election, and it went very badly, and hundreds and hundreds of people were killed. I think thousands were displaced. And Mr. Annan at the time was called in alongside Ben Mkapa of Tanzania and Graça Machel, initially to mediate a cessation to the violence, access for humanitarian actors, you know, the sort of the standard package of a crisis mediation. That turned into a 5-year-long process of looking at Kenya's democracy and systems of governance, and involved a huge sort of top to bottom constitutional review. But it also involved Mr. Annan asking a lot of questions about, you know, why did this happen? No one saw it coming. Kenya at the time, on the face of it, appeared to be a fairly stable, functioning democracy. Not perfect, but certainly not one that was on the cusp of descending into absolute, you know, violent civil war almost. And this is where he, like many others, started asking these questions that Dong was referring to in terms of what is a free and fair election, and what actually is an election that is going to give you a result that is credible. Because what we were finding, I think at the time, many in that field, was that authoritarian regimes, or would-be authoritarian regimes, were getting increasingly good at ticking all of the boxes that would give you a legal outcome. But they were doing it in such a way that the outcome might be legal, but it was far from legitimate. And as a result, these processes were coming out with victors who, you know, it was sort of signed off by the international community perhaps, but locally people knew that they had been conned. They knew that they didn't have a government that reflected them, that reflected the outcome of that process. And therefore you had a government effectively that had no credibility to govern. Worst case scenario, that was, you know, 4 years of inactivity and not much progress. But more often what you saw was huge instability and violence after an electoral process like that. So this is where people started looking more broadly at a concept of electoral integrity. It's not an easy question to answer, what exactly is integrity in an electoral context, but I think effectively what you're looking at, or what we have come to focus on, are two key things: trust and transparency, which again are both issues I think that Dong mentioned. When you have trust of the people, in both the elected officials and the process that's being run, then even if there are problems along the way, as you said, maybe some dead voters here or there, those are easily overcome because people understand that fundamentally they have been taken through a process that has resulted in a genuine reflection of the views of those voters, which wasn't always the case before. So we, on the back of that, convened, as Alejandro said, this electoral integrity initiative, which is a little bit of a network, frankly. It's not in itself a standing body. We have members basically who take part from the UN Electoral Assistance Division, from IFIS, from the Carter Centers of this world. And we try and sort of come together and look, as I said, not so much at the technical process of an election, but at this broader concept of, is the political space in which this election is taking place going to allow a credible and legitimate outcome or not? So our work hasn't been, when we've gone into specific countries, it hasn't been to sort of, help with the process per se. It's been things like, well, Don mentioned Zimbabwe. And that's a good example of a situation where, yes, you have an authoritarian regime that is up to absolutely no good, but you also have an opposition that is perhaps playing into their hands in terms of being very divided and allowing the ZANU-PF to frankly sort of divide and rule. And that's not unique. Often in authoritarian regimes, you have a very divided opposition, which facilitates the continuance of that authoritarian regime. So in Zimbabwe and some other places, we have worked with opposition candidates, or parties rather, to talk about the benefits in unifying behind a common candidate, for example. We have also engaged in support of various electoral institutions that are under pressure. I think that there happen to be quite a few people on the call this evening from Mexico. And before their last election, we worked with both the electoral management body, INE, and the Supreme Court, because they were both being put under a huge amount of pressure through the process by candidates who were basically saying, we know what the outcome of this election is going to be. If it's free and fair, I will have won. And therefore, if that's not the result, the institutions are to blame and we need to go after them. So in that context, the engagement and involvement of, and he was still with us at this time, Mr. Annan in particular, who visited Mexico with myself and some others, and visited the electoral management bodies in the courts, and just effectively provided that degree of cover that meant that political contenders weren't able to use the INE and the courts as footballs to the extent that they would have liked. It was in the course of that country-specific work that we began to see increasingly the impact of social media and the internet. And it became something that's just, you can't separate it now from questions around the integrity of an electoral process. So again, unfortunately, it was his last major policy initiative, but at the 2018, during the summer, Mr. Annan convened a group that brought together academics and people from Silicon Valley. He went and had some meetings with Mark Zuckerberg and others and pulled together a commission that was to look at some of these issues. And that work finalized with a report that came out last year. So I'm going to just sort of switch into the digital side of things and quickly, without too much detail going into this. I mean, it's a big report. Obviously, I don't want to do a report launch here, but I'll go through perhaps some of the main findings and recommendations and sort of leave it there. And we can perhaps come back to some of them in the Q&A. The first thing, and this was actually something very interesting and needs to be borne in mind, I think, whenever you have discussions around the digital impact, is you have to differentiate between what the social media and the internet have actually changed, and frankly, the way in which they've just exacerbated pre-existing challenges. And our findings was largely what you're talking about is pre-existing things like polarization, hate speech, to a degree, political finance, regulation not being particularly robust. Already, pre the internet, creating huge problems for democracies, but post social media, they just sort of explode into massive challenges that we are seeing the results of in electoral processes like what just happened in the States. So our attempt was to look really to understand the difference between, look, there are some fundamental questions that need to be addressed regardless of what social media and the internet are doing or not. And then there are some issues that are specific and unique to social media and the internet. And some of this is things like the velocity and virality of communications at the moment. I mean, it's very easy to make up a lie about a candidate. And if that goes viral, then it's on the other side of the world within 30 minutes. And frankly, there's very little that someone can do to sort of create well, rather correct whatever narrative has been created. I think obviously you have new challenges that do have some benefits in the terms of the anonymity, for example, of internet speech. You do have the real challenge of the size of the monopolies of Facebook and Twitter and others in this world, Google as well, which Google tends to sometimes get away with a lot of electoral related shenanigans. And on the back of all of this work, the commission, which did include some people from the industry, Facebook's former head of security who left the organization because of how they were dealing with the Russian threat, was part of the commission. So it was one that had sort of real understanding of how that society works. And they basically issued 4 sort of sets of recommendations. There was a general set that electoral support needs to be increased because the threats to elections and democracy at the moment just outstrip what they were 5-10 years ago. So we need a huge amount of capacity building in terms of funding civil society organizations, helping electoral management bodies, helping cybersecurity teams. But then there was also very specific actions for government and also for social media themselves. A lot of this, for example, focuses on political advertising. So there's a lot of need, for example, to make sure that the regulations that address online or offline political advertising transfer across onto the online space. There's a need, I think, to compel social media companies to provide more data, which is, I think, necessary for a range of issues. And then there's obviously, and I think this is one that gets a lot of focus, perhaps unfairly, is what social media companies themselves need to be doing. And I think there's a huge amount in terms of transparency around political ads, around data use. I think there's a lot that they could be doing in terms of early warning systems for electoral related crimes, interference, disinformation, and others. Some things that have been done in other areas, child trafficking, sex crimes, counterterrorism. There are some useful sort of collaborations that exist in those areas that could be moved across to the electoral sphere. Then I think finally, just to leave you with this, there was a number of areas where digital influences have changed the space so much that we need actually new norms. There's a gap in terms of our normative approach to some of these issues. So for example, we talk a lot about foreign interference and the use of social media to facilitate foreign interference, but there isn't actually an agreement in terms of what is okay and what isn't when it comes to foreign interference in an electoral process. Because you can, of course, give $10 million to your neighbor country in EMB to help them run an electoral process. But obviously you can't take $10 million and spend it on trolls and bots and hackers to undermine that process. Now those are 2 obvious sort of, easy examples, but in between, there's a whole sort of gray area that just isn't sort of agreed. There's, I think, an increased need for regulation around the vendors and producers of electoral technology. And I think one that's really interesting as well, which I'll sort of leave you with, is this idea that there's a new market of sort of transnational campaign consultants, right? These are sort of the Cambridge Analyticas, but now they exist as polling firms, they exist as sort of PR firms, they exist as marketing firms, and there is a real need to clamp down and control that sector, because it is one, I think, perhaps where the players with little compunction who will do anything it takes to win are gravitating. So that is where I think you really need a lot of attention. So that is, I think, some of the main findings of our digital work, which, based on some other comments I've made about the foundation, I hope sort of gives you a good idea of where we are. I think I've spoken far too long, which I apologize for, but Manuela, I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Declan. Yeah, I think that you complement each other in a very well fashion. And we have already some questions and concerns here shared by Esther and also David that I would like to flag. They are posted here. I will try to summarize the comment. The one made by Esther is a very simple one. It concerns, for instance, the example of Uganda, but I think there are many similar examples. Do you think that voting is really a political act or rather a personality cult in some cases? And then David has some other questions, but I would like to separate them because it's a different different topic. So let's stop now with Esther's concern. If you wish to address both Donk or Declan, whoever.
Declan, go ahead.
Well, I'll be very quick. I think, first of all, what's happening or what just happened in Uganda wasn't really an election. It was an election-like event, and you see precisely what we were seeing before, which is an authoritarian regime which is trying to tick all the boxes while actually giving its citizens absolutely no voice in governance. The personality cult question is interesting because there's a huge sort of pool of work that goes into, this sort of strong man African leader. I don't think it's a personality cult in the sense that everybody is really, or the people who voted for Museveni, sort of really admire him. I think basically it's practical survival. When you have people, and it happens a lot when people win elections completely legitimately, and then they start doing things that make them illegitimate, and suddenly they find themselves in a situation of, if they lose, them and a whole bunch of people around them are going to be in jail. And I think what you have in Uganda is more a realization that if Museveni was to go, a whole bunch of people around him would collapse, and I think it's people who have that self-interest that sort of keep these regimes going. Don, what do you think?
Yeah, look, may I be blunt? I don't know Uganda. If you talk to me about that, I have to look at the map and to see where it is. So, and then the people used to ask me a time ago, what do you think? I say, look, in the UN, nobody paid me to think. They paid me to work. And then I'm not a radio commentator, so I don't know. I much prefer to say that, because when I have a situation where I can deal with it, yes, I can say something. But it's, once again, the UN never paid you to think. That's a provocation for our colleagues from the former UN colleague.
I think that leads us to another topic, which is the role of the UN in general, and not only in the context of elections. But before getting to that very blurry topic, David has an interesting comment regarding what we can do, what should be done or could be done regarding the erosion of what he calls the democratic gold standard of free and fair elections, and what effective measures do Western democracy have to contain the risk, because there is a risk also in our own European area. And he also refers to the role of the social media that was more or less also addressed by Declan regarding the aberrations that can be circulated through the social media, and should they be banned altogether to avoid these aberrations. I don't know to what extent both concerns go together. I think so, but it's up to you to clarify. Dong, maybe you have some feelings on that. What can be done?
Yes, I would say I cannot give a direct answer, but I say the analysis could be the following. We have to make a clear distinction on what is the electoral process, it's a legal process, and what is the use and the perversion about the elections. And I would take the example of the last elections in the US. What was the scandal and why people are talking about the danger to democracy because of these elections? I say there are two things I personally will make a clear differences. The elections at itself and the judicial institution are extremely solid. There's nothing to say about that. If you look at the law, if you look at the judicial setup, it's extremely solid, from the Supreme Court to the Supreme Court at the state level. So that's one thing we always forget that the elections by itself are solid. What is the problem? And the problem is not new for the political scientists or for people like us. It's come from the acceptation or not of the candidate, of the loser. And the candidate for the 45th presidential elections in 2016 already declare, I quote, "I will accept the result if I win." He is very consistent of this line of thought, and nobody cared about that in 1916. So they accuse pandemic because the pandemic will go for Korea to vote for Korea and things like that. But postal vote is legal. So the whole problem was not addressed 4 years ago. Now they seem surprised to face a man who say that since ever. So what I mean, it's we have also to be clarify that. And if I may give a personal example on what is credibility and what is organization of elections, I will give the example of '94 in South Africa. When I was the UN advisor to the Electoral Commissions in South Africa, just before the commission was created, I was there. And if I can say that, the elections in South Africa, in terms of organization, in terms of respect of the law, are absolutely lousy. Nobody respect the law there. There was no electoral register. People were queuing 6, 7, 8 hours to vote, and that you will not have in the in your country. Nobody accept to wait for 5 hours. They can wait for 5 hours in Paris to have a vaccine. Yeah, but they're not going to wait for 5 hours to vote. But in South Africa, they vote. And we committed, we meaning that I was part of it, we committed a lot of violation of electoral law. Since from the voter list, we discussed with President Mandela, saying, look, we cannot vote because you have hundreds of thousands of Mozambicans who will come to vote. How we make the difference? And he said, look, I don't care. If you apply your criteria of voting free and fair, you eliminate millions of South Africans because nobody have any credential for voting. So better have 200,000 Mozambican vote than to eliminate 2 million South Africans. So, and nobody, really until now, nobody questioned the credibility of these elections. Even if from inside, from the administration side of it, we know that it was not really up to our own standard. So that to mention that we have to be careful to distinguish what is the administration of organization and what is the real perception of credibility. And perception of credibility is part of Declan through the analysis of social media and so on and so forth. But I myself will have to make a distinction between those two. The UN role was to observe until 2001. And I was the head of the last formal UN observation team in Fiji. In 2015, in Burundi, it was some sort of observation, but it was a political mission, not really observation mission. But why? Because the UN, I'm not talking on behalf of the UN. I was, far away from that. But I say, until I was there, the UN did, let the regional organization to do the observation. The EU, the Union African, and the Organization of American States. So those are the ones, they are doing the observation. The UN was doing more through UNDP, through NGP cooperation for the let's say what I call the electoral administration. That's yes. And then one of the things I like the reference Declan gave to Kenya, because I was in Kenya before the Kofi Annan arrival. I was there with IFES, and we look at the situation, and we also recommend that it is not a problem of administration, it's a problem of community. Yeah. And it's a problem of trust between communities. And that's why I say, look, we are now, I would say, we are now trust builder rather than expert on the field. Because the expert, I was sent to Kenya as an expert to look at how they organize it. And I found it. And we found it because I was with El Creek, I was with Kriegler from South Africa, and we decided we should ask somebody higher in the as a moral authority to deal with that, because it's nothing to do with administration of organization. It's all to do with conflict resolution, community antagonism, and that's, you see, you have the same problem in Burundi. I was in Burundi in 2015. The administration was well done. What is the problem is the community problem. And that's why the UN have to send a high-level representative there. So that's, I mean, more or less, we can see what is the situation. Organization is now well coped with. What is the problem? Especially in the case of the US, it's a problem, it's a political problem, and that's we have to deal with at the political level. And from the UN and the international community side, Kofi Annan was, respected figures. The foundation is now a reference for us. So those have to be clear. But we try not to mix it.
Thank you, very clear, Dong. And that precisely makes a link with Gabriel's comment regarding the role of the UN and now international organizations, since the UN is not on the ground anymore in that observer function. How can we avoid the situations where, as you said, communities or elites hijack a process or distort a process in a way or another? What can be done? But as you said, it is a political problem that is probably beyond the scope of what an international organization can do. Is that right? Declan, of course, if you want to intervene.
Look,
for the UN in these situations. No, it's a huge problem, and the reference to Nepal, I think, is just one of a few that I can think of off the top of my head, where the UN has been put into a position of arbitrating or passing judgment, not only on the outcome of an election, but the very purpose of an election. I mean, one of the challenges I think that the UN often faces is with these attempts to go through a peace process and mark it at the end with an election. And if you don't have that election, then your peace process has failed, which creates a huge range of complex and contradictory pressures, quite frankly, because in some countries, particularly those where democracy does not have a long history, the best thing for people or the society, in terms of delivering peace, is not necessarily going to be a comprehensive and integral electoral process. Those two are not necessarily always bed buddies. So yeah, I mean, I think that the UN has, I don't have any answers for it. I think it's a challenge that the UN is going to continue to face. I think I don't know, Dong, if you want to speak to that point. If not, I'll go back maybe to some of the other questions around social media. Is that?
Yes,
Yeah, go
please.
ahead.
There was one I think that David asked, which just to is
Yep.
a simple yes or no about should social media be banned, and I can completely understand where you're coming from, and I think my position would be, as hard as it is, we do need to remain faithful to and remind ourselves of what happened around the Arab Spring in 2012, and even since then, as problematic as it has become in many occasions, I think the power and possibility of social media to empower and educate and engage voters outstrips its potential negative impacts, which I know sounds absurd at the moment. But they do, I think, revolutionize politics and elections in ways that can be really interesting, and not just. I mean, even as sort of a disruptive force, like President Macron in France, for example, would not have won if it wasn't for Twitter. No, my point is not that he's a great president and I support him, but it is. I think there are benefits to, even in very established democracies, having these disruptive forces. But I agree, I think entirely that it cannot continue as it is, and unless social media is heavily regulated, and not sort of self-regulation, but unless there are more laws passed, and we're seeing it, I think. I don't know if any of you have followed the discussions in Brussels, but they have a new democracy action plan that's in draft, but is coming out. And it looks very closely at some of these issues. And I think the new administration in the States is going to be prepared to take on tech in a way that we haven't seen before. So I am cautiously optimistic, although the situation is pretty abysmal at the moment, in the power of social media to be a force for good. But right now, it's not, frankly. Manuel, I don't know, do you want to go on to some of the other questions? I've just been reading as we sort of pass down.
Yes. There is a question also that you probably cannot see, which was sent to me in a private mode regarding the external interventions using the social media. The example of Russia, of course, is a typical one. And related or unrelated to that, can we think about a sort of education of the voters regarding electoral integrity processes and so on, and what it means, so that voters really are aware of the risks that we are, for instance, mentioning now?
Sure. Okay, well, a couple of points. I think on the education question, absolutely there is a need for more education. I think in terms of very basic civic responsibility, democracy, values, processes, I don't think that is being taught to the extent necessary. There is also a whole other element about digital literacy, which is discussed a lot in terms of social media and the internet, and just increasing the ability of people to operate online, to make sure that they are familiar with how social media works, and then a whole other range of making people more aware of information on the internet, where it comes from, how to source it, all of this. The step that our commission went a little bit further in, which I think is also interesting as well, is that actually what you also need in terms of engaging and educating people isn't just literacy, digital literacy classes, but actually a greater effort to look at a piece of information and say, not only is this legitimate, where did it come from, what's the source, why it was shared with me, but also then that step further of saying, why did I want to believe this, even if it was a little bit questionable? Why did I immediately dismiss it? What is it about my own experience, my own cognitive bias, that is changing the way I engage with material online, and what is the impact of that? So I think that's another very interesting element as well. Dong, I feel like I've been speaking a lot recently.
No.
Don, what do you think?
Once again, I don't think. I mean,
Although we said, but you are not a UN official. Now you can think.
no, they say that, but still, after 30 years, you have some kind of your hard drive is completely full. So now I'm cautious about that, because yes, I understand that you worry about the internet because and social media, but in other circumstances, in other countries, like in my own country, or in China or in Hong Kong, social media is a liberal tool. It's a tool for you to open to the world. It's not something you have to fear. You have something you have to use, and that's what I would say. We have also to be to return to what was the original, the traditional way of thinking about elections. Elections is about discussion, free discussion, and looking for the fact. And our representative, you remember that, including today in England or in France, there is it's prohibited. It's prohibited to the members of the parliament to talk about their own constituencies. They talk about the general interest. And this idea of general interest, it's our, focus when we discuss about election. We discuss about election. Yes, we vote for somebody because it's our interest. But this somebody have also to take into account the general interest. And that's was, for me, it's something who was lost in the way. And we have to do that. Social media can be useful because it's transparent, it's obliged people to be much more open, and social media could be also manipulated. But all together, it depends on the countries where you can find an equilibrium, some kind of balance between this negative effect and this positive effect. I'm not in the position where I can be the judge of such a balance. But I think that we also have to be balanced. I don't see how I can be influenced by the Russian if I'm Vietnamese today. Yeah, I'm influenced by my friends, by my family, but not by the external things. But once again, it's I understand it's a controversial issue, but I also beg to have some kind of balance between these two aspects. In authoritarian countries, include, we also have that. Last comment is that nowadays I observe some kind of perversion of our electoral system, meaning that people know how to use observers. So they sometimes pay their own observers to be you kind of fake observers. Eastern countries, for example, including in Mexico, we are not sure always that the Mexican observers have the same credibility than they have in 24 years ago. So the whole things are changing. The whole the authorities understand and know the role of social media. They use that, and the day they use that with bots, they pay people to do that. It's we also have to think about this education. And once again, I would say civic education for me start at the maternal school. I mean, it's not that when you start to vote that you have a civic education. You have civic education. You understand the rule of law when you are 4 or 5. Piaget, Geneva genius, Geneva, say that by 5 years old, your personality is already, fixed. So I think that by 5 years old, your choice, electoral choice, also have been influenced by the family, and you have to start by that. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Dong. We have an interesting point raised by David, which is a simple one in formulation: money, money, money. Particularly, of course, in the system like the US, where really it is a major factor of distortions in the elections, but also in other countries, as he mentions, in India, Indonesia, or many other countries, and also the role of development funds that can influence the outcome of elections and also play a role in a direct or indirect distortion, and impacts therefore on the results. If you can both comment on the role of money. Dong, go ahead.
David just quote Mr. McConnell from the former the majority leader in the Senate. He, the McConnell, say also, elections, don't be stupid. He said, election is money, money, and money. So that's probably, it's true. The problem is real. I mean, the Supreme Court 2 years ago give a push on that side, meaning that you can spend whatever you have to promote your candidacy, directly or through the PACs, through the political association for committee, something like that, for in the US. And it's true also that in many countries, you have to spend a lot of money. Money on what? Money on media, money on promotion of your own candidacy. All of the countries have tried to have something to control it. In Mexico, for example, they fear the money is laundering money, the dirty money from organized crime. So that's why the regulation is 90% of the money from the parties have to be public money and 10% for the private money. It's the way to control it, but we know that it's extremely difficult to control the money of it. 15 years ago, still working with UNDP, I received a project from the government to control, for example, the use of social program for the vote. It means that the money can be given to people at condition that they vote for the country. That's the same the idea. But we received that money and we realized that something quite clear. Nobody can have the proof of it. We know that, but we don't know how is what is the real proof that the money you spend is the money you buy vote, because the vote is secret. So that, you can use the money. You can think that money is important for election, but money is not only important for election. Money is important for the judge, for the executive, for everybody else. So don't focus on the money. And when we were in Haiti, as the UN in the 90s, people were also using the argument that they are going to buy vote. I said, okay, be realistic. In Haiti, people are poor. So if they receive a can of Coke to vote for somebody, I would advise them to take the Coke, to drink it, and vote for whoever they want. And even between us two, many, if somebody come to give me $1 million to vote for him or for her, I would say the guy the lady who can have $1 million to give to me must be a good person. And then I vote for the good person. That's all. I mean, don't have to make sure. One thing we have to make sure of is that the person votes secretly and the person have the freedom of his opinion or her opinion. That is the key, basic human right, once again. But the money, you are not influenced by the publicity. And people have to be educated. And that's what Declan say, education. to make sure that you vote for the person deemed appropriate of your choice, of your priority. And if we can do that, I give you one example in Taiwan, 20 years ago. You have also the money problem in Taiwan. And then they publish the poll on why you vote and how you vote. And they realize that 50% of the electorate have been offered money. 50% of the electorate have been offered money. Those 50%, 20% vote for those who gave them money. And in this 20%, 10% say, anyway, I will vote for this party with or without money. So 10% of 50% accept to vote according to the money. After the publication, the party gave up the policy of giving money to people because it served to nothing. If Alexandro present himself as a president next time, I will vote for him. What he can give me a cup of wine, or not, I anyway give him my vote. But if on top of that, he invite me to a cup of ice cream at the Geneva lake, I will accept voluntarily. So have to be realistic about that. Yes, it is a problem. Yes, we have to control it because it's a money, because also for some theoretical reason and some very deep philosophical reason. Your vote is not your personal property. The vote in the real meaning of it is a part of the civic duty you receive to choose the best person to govern the country. So it's a civic duty, and the civic duty, you cannot sell it. Your car, you sell it, you can sell it, but your vote is not, once again, it's not a private property. So if we forget that, and if we teach that to people, they can take money, they can take well, they vote under their own conscience. That's one of my reaction.
Yeah, Dong, I would like immediately to react with two reactions, actually. One that comes from the chat regarding the money that you need to be a candidate in the first place, and the bribes and everything that goes with it. So not at the level of the vote, but the money at the origin of the candidacy. That is also distortion because you have it or you don't have it. And then also regarding the secrecy, that is not always physically, guaranteed. I can think about many countries, for instance, my own in Venezuela, where the secrecy was not guaranteed because you had physical aggressions and threats at the moment of putting your vote in the ballot box. So how to avoid also these kind of things that are really big distortions. I don't know if Declan also, you may have also some recent examples maybe that go in that direction.
Well, there's a couple of things I would say. I agree entirely with, I think, the challenge here. I think opaque political financing has been a thorn in the side of healthy democracies long before any of the digital issues came up. And back, I think, in 2010, we were talking about this. I can't think of one country that has, in my mind, sufficient political finance regulations. I think countries where they have regulations aren't always the best. The US position that money is speech, I think, is just absurd. And we're seeing it now, I think, impact other areas. For example, online political advertising and all of the hate speech and polarization that it can facilitate partly is only due to the fact that people can pay for those online ads without having to provide any, records or traces. And you see these things pop up on your Facebook page and your Twitter page. and frankly, you have no way of knowing who paid for them. And yes, but the other issue, which I just want to stress the importance of, which, as you said, was mentioned in the chat, is the question of candidate debt. Not just in terms of, they spend a lot of money buying votes or whatever, but there are some countries that it's just very, expensive to run television ads, run radio ads. And you have, I think, certain countries where people come into power and off the mark from the start, they're $100 million in debt to some, political consultants and their priority is not governing the country. It's, oh my God, how do I pay this back? And also, how do I win again in 4 years? So I think, the political finance isn't just a challenge in terms of the lack of regulations, but also the terms to which it can dictate governance priorities.
Well,
Dong, yes.
look, no, you are both right. The problem, and if you look at the Mr. Obama memoir, and he count how he need to raise money to run as a candidate, not the money afterward. It's clearly a real problem. But once again, it depends on the country, because you have countries where the candidate has been designed, has been appointed by the party, and then you have underground money to give to the leadership of the party eventually. Well, I don't know. It's impossible to know how the party decided, especially in the proportional system. The leadership of the party is the key to decide who is going to run for candidate or not, because then you make sure that the candidate will win. So that's one thing. But we have also to be careful, because I was in Haiti 5 years ago. The political party laws are so strange that if you have 20 signature, and you have a program, and you have some function, president, vice president, and secretary general, you can run for candidate. And you have to make a deposit of $2,000, because if you got 500% of the vote, the money will be returned to you. If you have less, you lose the money. Okay, so it's very clear. So it doesn't mean that, but you have, because of that, there were something like 56 presidential candidates, 56, and the 4 first received above 10%, above 5% of the vote, and the rest, meaning something like 50%, received from 5% to 0.02%. So I asked them, some of them are friends, so I asked them, why do you run for that if you are sure that you will not receive 5% of the vote? Nobody knows you. They say, that's where you don't understand our country. I spent $2,000, but I put on my business card, engineer something, former candidate to presidency. And that's opened a lot of doors to me. So it's investment. So don't be too strict on the moral side. You have to look at the the context of it. It's not a general rule. It's true that you have to be careful about about those kind of situation, or where the money is circulated, but freely, but also underground, if you have this kind of proportional system. And you have also to make sure, that's why I say the discussion in the democratic countries have to be open. It means that have to be transparent and not negotiation on the table. But that's what all we can do. And I would say better say that we cannot do anything about that. We just identify the problem. We don't want to interfere because from external side, we cannot interfere on that kind of things. We can advise them. We can inform them. We can make it transparent. But intervention is impossible, and better not get involved with that because we are losing our own credibility. Second question about secrecy. I agree. In some countries, we know that the vote is not, the secrecy of the vote is not respected. I was in Haiti in 2012 to 2010. And somebody was looking openly at even if you have a screen, you have people looking at through the window of what you vote. If you have a screen, it's difficult to not to respect your secrecy. But to be quite honest, the fraud I witnessed or I know about, directly or indirectly, the last one is Bolivia in 2019. It's not through the vote, individual vote. It's through the electoral authority, how the OAS discovered that. Because I worked with them on that issue. They discovered that because at one moment of the counting, the machine has stopped working for 24 hours. The computer was down. So they say, well, it's an electricity problem. But what is interesting in this electricity problem is the day after, when the computer start working again, the tendencies have changed. The Alexandro may remember the situation in Mexico in 1988, when the computer shut down. Se cayó, they fall down or shut up. And then the day after, they start again with different tendency of the vote. And the OAS of experts discover that there were two other, bases, computer bases, where the results were transmitted to them because the official one was closed. And these two underground bases were giving the result. That's why they say it's a fraud. It's not that you have 5,000 persons organizing, manipulating the vote that count. Because in a country like France, where you have 70 million voters, you always have something strange, missing ballots, and people who are going out to claim that who they are voting for. It doesn't count. What it counts when if you organize me, since I'm no more UN official, you ask me to organize a fraud. I say yes, I can do that. Yeah. But I do that through the central authority, but not at the polling station, because that will not count for nothing. And every country have those kind of problems. You don't have anywhere except Seychelles, where it was so well organized that you don't have any kind of disturbance. But otherwise, you always have technical problem. You always have ballots missing. You always have people who are not involved in the, who are not registered or who are registered in the wrong place, etc., etc. But that will not change the global result. And especially that should not be the basis of our perception. It's credible or not. Once again, if you look back at the South African elections in '94, I sent Manuela, the ballot votes. You can see that it was not really something the Kofi Annan Foundation will accept today, but nobody think that it was not credible, and that's the real, criteria for countries who were rather, young in terms of vote experiences.
Yes, thank you, Dong. By the way, let me just add also that if both of you have additional documents, articles, things that you would like to add to our space, that will be posted together with the video and in our website, that is also useful. You can do that anytime, of course. We are running out of time. So before giving the floor to Alejandro for some concluding remarks, I would like just to note that maybe we didn't solve all the problems of electoral integrity, but certainly I think everybody's convinced that voting is certainly better and democracy is certainly better now more than ever as compared to anything else. So over to you, Alejandro, and thank you both speakers for what we learned today. Alejandro.
Thank you very much, Manuel, and thank you very much, Dong and Declan. You really walked us from the basics to the practicalities and the tricks and money and whatever happens in different countries and regions in the world. And now, of course, Dong, you mentioned several times Mexico, and I was raised in a family that was in the middle of the perfect dictature that was described by Vargas Llosa. So all the tricks that we could do in Mexico, we did them for 75 years. Just a few elements that I would like to mention, and possibly I think it would be a good idea, since democracy, I think it's challenged constantly, that we could have in, I don't know, 1 year time at least, another session on the evolution of democracy and what has happened in the countries that we have been following up. I just would like to make a link with the human nature, because at the end, it's humans who are voting. It's still not artificial intelligence, even if some say that the artificial intelligence is so advanced that they know how humans will vote, so that votes might not even be necessary in the future, which is a nonsense. But of course, having lived in Peru, I was there when the president had to go to exile, and he was the persona non grata, that everybody was claiming that he would never come back to the country. And then a few years later, he came back and he was elected president. And there's something that I cannot understand. There are some other countries, my own country, Argentina and others, that in perfectly transparently with integrity, the results are mind-blowing. It's really amazing how people can vote. There is another issue that I always repeat myself when I see the experience in the countries, is that integrity, transparency, and fair elections do not guarantee economic success. And in many cases, I have heard that economic success is like a trade-off for democracy. Oh yes, of course, we had a dictatorship in this country, but we had the best economic growth in the country in the last 10 years. Yes, of course, in China, democracy does not work, but they are the second largest economy in the world. They are working, and we are dealing with we're buying whatever they do, and actually human rights and democracy, it's not an issue, because the economy has to move on. And just to make a link to something that possibly we could take on in another session, is the link between democracy and development. Here in this session, we have many of us who work in the field of either health or social protection. John Woodall and myself in the actuarial calculations, and Gabriele and David Rohr in policy design. And each time that I went to a country, when they asked me what is the most important thing for developing social protection in the country, Is this the policy advice by United Nations? Is it the actuarial evaluation? Is it implementation? Is it having the resources? And my reply was always, it's democracy. The way that you take the decisions on how to protect, who pays and who receives is really based on democracy. And of course, in something that was mentioned by both, by Dong and by Declan, by education. Of course, if I'm going to invite you, Dong, and I will, next time that you come to Geneva, to the lake, and we are former UN officials, we don't have a problem. But I have seen people that are just struggling to eat that day, or eat that week. And when they receive money to pay for one or the other, it's almost as survival or a token that they take because they are in such a low situation in educational terms and in economic terms that they just took whatever comes from any source. So thank you really very much for a very inspiring and complete session. Thank you very much for your time. We'll keep alive the documents that you sent to us in our site. And by the way, our site has been refurbished and it is not working now, but we hope that by the end of the month, it will be working. So we will put up there the recording of these sessions so that we can have more visitors. Thank you very much also to all the participants that took the time to spend almost 1 hour and a half in this, and looking forward to see you in the next Great Talk. Have a great evening, stay safe, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.